Good evening. My name's Alan Brooks, and for my sins, I'm coordinating both the Richmond History Festival, which I'll come to in a moment, and tonight's activity. And some of you were here last time, but forgive me, I'm going to repeat the purpose for which we're here. Part of the Richmond Bicentenary involves the History Festival, which is in the last weekend in January of next year. That's a traditional history conference, plus by invitation to anybody who wants to participate, people coming forward with historical materials, exhibitions, family histories, whatever. And we hope to put all those things on together. But in order to invite you to take part in that, we thought it was only proper that we spend a little bit of time telling you where you could find out about Richmond's history. In the longer term, what we thought a possible benefit from this activity could be that we kindle, rekindle, put it whichever way you like, interest in local history in Richmond. And as I said last time and got absolutely no response whatsoever, somebody's got to plan this activity in 49 years' time for the next, it's the sesquicentenary and 250th. So we haven't, I don't think most of the people in this room are going to be there, but perhaps. Now during the last meeting, I said what we were going to try and do is, if anybody's got any materials at home which they'd like to share with other people, they don't know what a photograph is, or they don't know what a map is, or they think it's really good and they just like to share it, we put up this little storyboard over there, and we invite you to bring things along. And so is the fact that it didn't stand looking empty. I put some stuff on the thing this afternoon, and I'll come back to that later on. Now, the other bit of the Richmond Talks is that for the first 10 minutes or so, the person who is, as you may know, you've seen the programs over there, the bicentenary activities, which start in December this year, are organised over 5 weekends. They're not continuous, they're broken. The first one, of which is the celebration of the laying of the foundation stone for the bridge, and Gary Richardson, who's organising that, spoke at some length about that last time. The History Festival I'll come back to in just a moment, and at the next Richmond Talks, Dr. Diane Snowden, who's running the third weekend activity, which is a convict muster, which will be held here in Richmond on the weekends of whenever. The 9th to the 12th of February 2024, and then the one after that is the open homes and activity, which we'll talk about later. Now, just to spend a couple of minutes before I get into what I want to talk about, I'd just like to talk about what we can about the History Festival. Of all the activities you're likely to hear of in the next couple of months, this is perhaps the most ill-prepared, because we have a call for papers and exhibitions out at the moment, and that doesn't close until noon on the 6th of September. And until it does, we don't really have a feel for what is going to come in. We've also got the 2 primary schools in Richmond doing their own activities as part of the bicentenary, and by the end of the 3rd term, we'll have an idea from them as to what they're going to produce, which we'll be able to carry forward and share with the rest of the community. The preliminary planning suggests, and is only preliminary, is that we'll hold the conferences in one of the 2 school halls in Richmond, but we'll use the centre of the town hall, the supper rooms, the courthouse for permanent exhibitions which are both open to the public, but which we can lock up at night time for security purposes. We've also got to share this hall with the market on one of the days. There's also going to be an antique roadshow held in Richmond, we hope with one of the TV channels, and there'll be a number of art exhibitions which will both be generated locally and will be coming into Richmond as part of that activity. So what I can do, as Heather has already mentioned to you, if you could keep your eye on the, excuse me, the website, as plans come in and we get more detail, then we'll make them public to you. Does anybody have any questions about that last little bit I've just talked about? No? In that case, could I just go back to, to talking a little bit about, right there? A little bit about finding history of Richmond. At the last meeting, I talked about the availability. There's two sort of sources at the moment in printed form. There's books and journals. And the books I referred to very briefly was Carl von Steglitz's 1953 history, which is available. Occasionally you find it in second-hand bookshops. It's actually a pamphlet rather than a book, but it's quite informative. The history of, I've put some books over there which I'm going to talk about if you want to go and have a look at them. They're all got tracking devices on them, so if you take them, I'll know where you are. The second one I want to talk about is Mary Kinloch Wishall's history, which is written in about 1974. It's not dated. Elizabeth Jones's Richmond, Tasmania Crossing Place, 1973, which is more generally available in most libraries. Oak Lodge, a number of people, one over there, a number of people around Richmond have copies. And the last and most useful, but unfortunately the least available, is Diane Snowden's thematic history of the cultural resources of the township of Richmond, which was prepared in 2000, and that is available for reading in the State Library Reading Room. A book I didn't mention, and I apologise, history is not all about 1820 and even 1920, but very often it's about 1991, isn't it, Mary Paul? And people who've come to town to live here and getting people's perspectives about living in a town like Richmond. A book I'd refer you to, but it's very hard to find, is Mary Paul LaRue, who's hiding behind people over in the back row. It's called A Frog in the Billabong. And this is the English translation is available. But again, you have to go to the State Library unless, Mary Paul, you have a couple of cartons in your carrot? You don't? No, okay. But I do urge you to, it's a great read, and it's really lovely and personal. It's not sort of highfalutin stuff, which is terrific. I should mention too, of the histories I've talked about, if you want to have a good laugh, you should really read Mary Kinloch Wishall's history. And I won't give the story away, but the exploding cannon at Prospect House is certainly worth a read and a laugh out loud. I also talked about journals, which are available. The Coal River Valley Historical Society Journal. It's available at Oak Lodge and again in the State Library Reading Room. And volume 3, Alex Green's story of the trip of a group of, I can't remember who they were now, who all went to Colebrook on the train for a day trip. And, well, it was much longer than a day trip. It is also a good laugh out loud read. So these things aren't all boring. Some of them are great fun. The other set of journals I referred to was the Tasmanian Historical Research Association's journals, which are available in the State Library Reading Room and are fully indexed, so you can find out where you want to go. I'm really telling you to go, if you want to read materials, is to go to Oak Lodge, Sorrel Library, and then the city libraries, both the Hobart City and the State Library upstairs on the corner of whatever they are streets. Online, the resources are mixed, but are available. A good place to start is the Libraries Tasmania website. The Tasmanian Museum and Art Gallery website has a lot of materials, particularly images. I mentioned Peter McPhee's Peter McPhee Historian, that's what full name, website, which is really useful because what it does is it takes little stories about individuals or a farm or a person and turns them into quite interesting historical sort of narrative. And you can see that history isn't all about dry sort of stuff. It can be quite useful and interesting material. I also mentioned the Tasmanian Historical Research Association's podcasts, which are available even to non-members. And while the range, because they've only been doing it now for about 3 or 4 years, and the range tends to be all of Tasmania, not just southern Tasmania in Richmond, but they are a good listen. You could also Google simply Richmond and the Coal River Valley. And tonight, which is why we're here, Nick Brodie will be talking to us about using Trove as a resource to be able to write history. Now, the other things before we turn over to Nick is I did mention briefly that if you're starting off on this exercise, or even if you're coming back to it, it's quite useful to keep a journal so you can remember where you've been and what you recorded and where you recorded it, because we'll discover when you're presenting materials which you've acquired the information online, in order to write that up and tell other people, you have to mention both the web, not just the website, but the date you accessed it, because unlike books, websites of course change. So you need to be able to anchor your argument in both a place and in a time. So I'm going to wind up now. We have a little break for